House Minority Leader. You got a job now. Come right on up here. Representative Scott Inman. Thank you.
Good to see you. Wow, it is great to see you all again. And I do want to say, I have the privilege of serving as the House Minority Leader, and I've been the Minority Leader for the last 5 years, and it has been my privilege to do so because I get to lead what I believe is the best caucus in the entire legislature. And if you look behind me over my shoulder, please wave all the House Democrats who are out here to greet you today. Now, before I begin my comments, I want to thank the Education Coalition. I want to thank the Education Coalition for the opportunity to speak to you again this year. Last year, I was honored to speak before 25,000 of you at the rally, and I'm honored and I'm humbled to receive the honor again this year. But I have to admit that as I prepared my comments and I thought back to last year's rally when thousands of teachers and parents and principals showed up, and then I walked out of the Capitol today to address thousands of teachers and parents once again this year, it struck me that apparently some of the hard-headed politicians that I work with never learned the lesson that I learned all those years ago in Mid-Del and at Del City High School. And that was if there's one thing you don't want to cause a teacher to do, that's to have them look you in the eye, wag that finger and say, "Don't make me have to tell you twice." But as I did last year, I want to express my sincerest gratitude to each of you for being here today. Your presence, your support, and your determination is affirmation to my colleagues and to me that not only should the education of the more than 680,000 public school students in Oklahoma be our most important cause, but it's affirmation that the good people of this great state, you, are paying attention. And when your elected officials fail to make our kids a top priority, you will march upon the Capitol to ensure that they are. And so from the bottom of my heart, and on behalf of my entire caucus, and on behalf of public education supporters across this state, today we open our offices, open our arms, open our ears, and open our hearts as we say, welcome back to your state capitol. One year ago tomorrow, students, parents, grandparents, teachers, principals, and administrators rallied on these steps because the state of public education in Oklahoma was in crisis. Oklahoma was either 48th or 49th in the nation in what it spent to educate our children. And while we have some of the best and brightest teachers in the country, only 2 states paid their teachers worse than we did. That caused us to lose more than 1,500 teachers, all the while our student enrollment increased by more than 40,000. Despite the fact that there were fewer teachers teaching more and more children, this legislature continued to add on more unfunded mandates and new higher stakes testing. And all of that came at a time when your elected leaders would pass budget after budget that cut funding for our schools by 23%, deeper than any other state in the nation. You rallied a year ago to let your government know that such statistics, that reality was unacceptable. You rallied to demand change. But unfortunately, many of your representatives weren't even in the building last year. They knew you were coming. They disagreed with what you were trying to do, and thus they did all they could to avoid the confrontation of coming face to face with the consequences of their fiscal mismanagement. And while many weren't around to listen, some of my colleagues were. And we heard your call for change. We heard loud and clear that you were rallying with 2 messages. One, you wanted passage of House Bill 2642, guaranteeing $600 million of new funding for our public schools over the next decade. And 2, you called for a halt to irresponsible tax cuts that did little to improve the lives of all Oklahoma citizens, but did a great deal more to erode funding for our students. That's why you rallied then. But today you rally because your elected officials didn't listen. Today you rallied because they ignored your demand for change. In fact, less than 24 hours after the education rally last year, before the parking lot had been swept clean and before the porta potties had even been hauled away, the Oklahoma legislature violated your second demand when they passed not one, but two tax cuts that would give the average Oklahoman only $29 a year, but would deplete our general revenue funds by more than $200 million. Now, you heard me right. At a time when budgets for our schools had been cut by more than $200 million, more than any other state in the nation, the day after you rallied calling on your legislature to stop cutting taxes until we properly funded our schools, your leaders ignored 25,000 of you and did the exact opposite of what you asked. It would be unbelievable if it wasn't so true. That's why you rallied today. You rallied today because less than 2 months after you left, House Bill 2642, your top demand, the bill number that was plastered on every placard throughout the crowd, and the promise to truly make public education a priority, it was shelved and never allowed to reach the governor's desk. And when the final budget was constructed, even though our schools would see a slight increase in funding, it would be so inconsequential that when it was all said and done, it didn't even keep up with the increase in student population, and thus our districts would take another per pupil cut last year. That's why you rallied today. Now, since they refuse to accept your solutions, you must be wondering, well, what are their solutions? Well, just to give you an idea here are two. Instead of putting more money in the classroom, they introduced voucher legislation that will only serve to divert more money away from the classroom instead of towards it. And just as depressingly, the way they show their support for Oklahoma teachers is by passing House Bill 1749, hindering a teacher's ability to organize instead of giving you the dollars you need to organize your classroom. That's why you rallied today. That's how your legislature treated your demands. That's how your legislature treated your children. So just like last year, I've got a question for you. I'll ask you, have you had enough? Yes. Are you ready to demand change? Yes. Then we must not let this moment, you must not let this time slip through your hands. For together, thousands of us can fight for our children. Together, thousands of us can advocate for their futures. But to do so, you must seek out your representatives and senators, and you must call upon our governor to put an end to the fiscal insanity that has plagued our school children these last 5 years. You must make them listen, and you must make your demands crystal clear. First, even though we recognize that these are tough budget times, the legislature must do more than pass another flat education budget, or worse yet, pass another budget that cuts funding for our schools. If your leaders share your priorities, then they will find a way to increase education funding, and they will find a way to do it this year. So you must demand more money for the classroom. Second, if we want to keep top quality educators that we have and recruit top quality educators to fill our empty classrooms, then we must make increasing our dismal teacher salaries a priority as well. You know, I think it's high time that states like Arkansas, Kansas, Texas, and New Mexico had to ask the question, what are we going to do about all of our great teachers moving across the border to Oklahoma instead of the other way around? So you must demand that our children's teachers get paid what they deserve. And third, if we really are going to be a state that believes that the government that is closest to the people governs best, then it is time you demand an end to increased mandates and high-stakes testing that only serve to eliminate local control, not foster it. After all, I believe that the parents, teachers, and principals of our schools know far better what's best for our children than the politicians here at 23rd and Lincoln. So you must demand they support local control. Now, I'm certain, if you haven't already heard it, at some point you will. When you lay out your list of priorities, you will be met with this question. Well, how do you propose we pay for it? After all, the price of oil has fallen to below $50 a barrel. Well, that's a legitimate question, and one that can be answered like this. To begin with, remind them that a few years ago, when oil was over $100 a barrel, and we were all paying $3.50 for a gallon of gas, states like North Dakota were increasing their funding for public education by more than 23%, while at the same time Oklahoma was cutting funding for our schools by the exact same amount. So let's dispense with the excuses and get on with the solutions. First, let's put a halt to the impending $200 million tax cuts. They don't take effect until next January, and so they can be stopped without affecting anyone. And doing so would ensure $57 million more for our schools this year and $200 million more for the schools in future years. Second, it's time that we get a handle on the billions of dollars in tax credits and exemptions that our state gives away. Now, while I would agree that spending money to incentivize business is important, I certainly don't think that it's more important than educating the children of our great state. After all, for what have we really accomplished if we entice businesses to our state but have failed to properly educate the workforce they need to fill their jobs? And third, as the state grows out of this economic hole, the legislature should treat our schools just like it treated our roads and bridges. If we can guarantee $60 million new each and every year to pave our roads and bridges, then we can certainly see fit to spend $60 million new to improve the lives of our kids. And as I bring my comments to a close, I want to warn you, and I mean this, I want to warn you, that you cannot merely come here today and demand change. For if that's all you do, you will continue to get what you've always gotten. In order to improve the lives of our kids, you must demand change and promise accountability. You see, for it is the promise of accountability that will serve as the necessary impetus to convince our leaders to do the right thing. Unfortunately, though, it's a lack of accountability that has put us in this very position. I detailed how the legislature so cavalierly ignored the top two demands from last year's rally. Remember, you were here demanding House Bill 2642 be passed and that the tax cut train be stopped. But when the session was all over, House Bill 2642 was dead, and not one, but two tax cuts were added to the books. Now, all of that happened in an election year. So when the largest rally at the Capitol in more than a generation occurs, and the legislature completely ignores their constituents, one might think that more than a few politicians would pay the price for their decisions. But in fact, on election night in November of 2014, every single politician who was responsible for defeating House Bill 2642 and for passing those irresponsible tax cuts was reelected and sent back to the Capitol to continue to do what they've always done. In short, there was no accountability. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, I want to thank you for being here today and for being a clarion voice for Oklahoma's children. But if you want this rally to produce real results, then you must demand change and promise accountability. And when you come face to face with your elected officials, whether that's here today or back home in your communities, I want you to do something for me. I want you to take them aside. I want you to look them squarely in the eyes, and as politely and as clearly as you can, deliver this message. If you can't find a way to make educating our children your top priority, then I'll find a way to make replacing you mine. Thank you so much, and God bless.